Okay, so this is our last week of new assignments for remote learning. So we're trying to do the Cold War in a nutshell. So today we're going to do part one of the timeline of the Cold War. Tomorrow I'll have a lesson on the Cuban Missile Crisis. And then Thursday we'll do part two. Were we in the classroom? We would, of course, be doing things a little bit more detailed and using our interactive notebook. So you'll see images through these timelines of things that you would have done in the classroom. All right, so timeline of the Cold War, part one, 1945 to 1965. So at the end of World War II, there is a conference, the Yalta Conference. You have who attended the big three. So you have the United States, this fellow in the middle, Franklin Delano Roosevelt represented the United States. Winston Churchill, this man, from Great Britain. Joseph Stalin from the Soviet Union. And this was a meeting to discuss the outcome of World War II, discussing what was going to happen in Europe, its post-war reorganization, what was going to happen, especially Germany, what was going to happen in the areas surrounding the Soviet Union. This happened February 1945 in Yalta, Crimea, Ukraine. And then why did it happen? Well, the war was coming to an end. And so they needed to decide what they were going to do to deal with, a lot of things. Pretty much at this point, part of the conference, Roosevelt wanted Stalin to join in the war against Japan. And they also, of course, discussed what was going to happen with Germany. So part of what you would have done in your interactive notebook looks like this. So Stalin with Germany, of course, you looked at this last week just a little bit with the origins of the Cold War. And Joseph Stalin felt, Germany should be at fault for World War II. They should be punished. They should pay back war reparations. Churchill disagreed, wanted to divide Germany to help Germany recover. It wasn't all of Germans' fault, especially knowing what Hitler had been up to. Didn't want to blame all of Germany. And of course, the United States wanted to come to a compromise. The United States and Great Britain being very much so allied during this conference, looking for democracy, voting, freedom as an outcome for a lot of countries, or so many countries from World War II. Joseph Stalin promises all of this, doesn't follow through with those promises. Okay, so the next step in the timeline that we're going to look at is the Korean War. So although you'll hear the Cold War as, it's very much the tension between the United States and the Soviet Union, and you'll hear it as a war where a weapon was never fired, and that's between the United States and the Soviet Union. There were several battles and wars. I mentioned them in an earlier lesson last week that happened during this time period that did involve, of course, weapons. The Korean War. So it was fought between South Korea and communist North Korea. So you have communism here, you have wanting democracy here, you have the 38th parallel here, right? It was the first major conflict, the first major battle of the Cold War, as the Soviet Union supported North Korea and the United States obviously supported South Korea. It went from June 25th, 1950 to July 27th, 1953, almost 3 years of a war that neither side won. That's why the 38th parallel is here. This is where it began, and this is where it ended. Neither area gained really any ground. And as you see, they are still divided today. North Korea is still communist, and South Korea is not. So another little image, here's the 38th parallel, just to kind of show you. And again, a lot of the battling was around this, trying to push back both areas, and neither area over a 3-year time period gained any ground. So in our interactive notebooks, we would have had, why did we go to war in Korea? And we went because communist North Korea invaded South Korea. And so we were, remember, fighting against communism, our whole containment policy, trying to contain communism to just the USSR. And what was the result of the war? Neither North Korea nor South Korea won. It was a stalemate. And Korea is still divided today at the 38th parallel. Okay, so another part of our timeline. Let me back up just a second. Sorry, I mean, to give you the years here. So, of course, we saw this was around 1945, the Yalta Conference. The Korean War, of course, we saw was for 3 years in the 1950s. Okay, 50 to 53, I think we just saw. All right, so then we have the McCarthy hearings. All right, so they're going to be next in our timeline. It's a really famous time period that a lot of people know about. The Senator Joseph McCarthy, he wanted to uncover a lot of spying he thought was going on in the U.S. Army, as in communist spies. And this is really called a time period of the Red Scare. He held a lot of hearings. They were held live. They were televised. I'm pretty sure my memory serves me. Oh, yes, it's right there for you, right? Live television. Yes. So this was very famous, these hearings, where he was pretty much accusing just various and sundry people of being communist spies. Okay, so this was in late April 1954, and it was televised. Democrats wanted the world to see the rat that McCarthy really was. They wanted to show him as a bully and that he was throwing out false allegations, so accusing people falsely of being communist spies. So these hearings went on for a couple of months. June 1954, McCarthy loses all of his supporters. He is condemned or put down for his reckless actions. He did remain a part of conference, but he loses all of his power. McCarthy even accuses Congress of being communist. So this whole time period, of course, is everyone's scared of communism, scared of it coming. We looked at that last week, scared of it coming into the United States, trying to make sure that we keep our democracy. And as a reaction to this fear still, this is another one of those outcomes of a reaction to that fear is these hearings where he was just accusing people in the military randomly or without, any evidence of being communist spies. So in the classroom, we would have done this in our IMBs. We would have put that it was from April to June 1954. Who was he and what was he known for? Joseph McCarthy was a Wisconsin senator, and he was known for his aggressive interrogations of suspected communists in the United States Army. And what happened to McCarthy as a result of the hearings? He was charged with using improper influence to get special treatment. He was acquitted, but his popularity went down. Crash and burn. All right. Next in our timeline was the Bay of Pigs invasion. So this happens the 14th of April in 1961. So a little backup to this, 1959, Fidel Castro, he sets up a communist government in Cuba. And a lot of Cubans leave. They're exiled, actually, and they flee to the United States of America. So we take in these Cuban refugees, one of our vocab terms. They've had to leave their homeland of Cuba. Okay, so the United States trains these Cuban exiles for a secret invasion into Cuba. In 1961, John F. Kennedy becomes president. And then, so that's our little bit of our background to what was the Bay of Pigs invasion. So the 14th of April in 1961, these Cuban exiles who had been trained by the United States, and they came to invade Cuba. Because remember the whole containment policy, trying to fight communism in the Bay of Pigs area. The U.S. hoped that the Cuban people would join in with these exiles and join in with their plan to overthrow Castro after 72 hours, which is about 3 days. The invasion was over. 200 of the invaders were killed, 1,000 were captured. And Castro's forces, they quickly rounded up the invaders. So the invasion itself was a failure to get rid of communism quickly in Cuba. Huge failure, the Bay of Pigs invasion. But that's what it was, part of the containment policy, part of trying to fight this spread of communism around the world. Okay, so in our IMBs, we would have had this image, the Bay of Pigs invasion. It was in April 17th, 1961. What was it? It was a full strike against Cuba's communist leader, Fidel Castro. The U.S. used about 1,400 Cuban exiles who were trained, and they trained them as soldiers. And was it a success or a failure? It was a failure. The invaders were outnumbered by Castro's troops. The local Cubans did not side with the invaders, and they were rounded up pretty quickly. So, big failure on the United States part, or the part of democracy. Failed on that one. Okay, the last thing we're going to do today for our timeline is the Berlin Wall. So, what was the purpose of the wall? Well, if you remember from last week, Berlin is divided into East and West Berlin. So, West Berlin is actually controlled by France, the United States, and Great Britain. So, we've got democracy going on. And then East Berlin is controlled by Russia, communism. So, many people in East Berlin, communists, saw that life in West Berlin is a whole lot better, and that people in West Berlin, they've got all this freedom. From 1949 to 1961, as many as 2.6 million people escaped from East Berlin communists to West Berlin, or West Germany. Okay, freedom. So the wall was to prevent more people from fleeing communist control, from escaping into West Germany. East Germany built the Berlin Wall, completely encircling West Berlin. I'll show you a map in here in just a minute. And the purpose was to cut off West Berlin from the rest of East Germany, because remember, Berlin is in the middle of communist Germany. What were some of the impacts of the wall? Well, one, the wall separated families. Once the wall was built, no one was allowed to cross it. This meant their families lived in different districts of Germany. They could no longer see each other. The communists felt that the wall was a protection around East Berlin to keep out all these ideas of freedom and democracy and independence. Some felt that it was more like a prison wall, though, keeping you in instead of keeping other things out. And the West Berlin, their reaction was kind of different. They were kind of glad to have that wall there, to keep communism away from them. So this is a caricature of the president, John F. Kennedy, at that time, and it says, "It's not a very nice solution, but a wall is a whole lot better than a war." No one wanted to go back to war at this point. So if we were in the classroom, we would have, looked up some images of the Berlin Wall. You would have done your own graffiti on it, and this would be why. So here is an actual picture of when the Berlin Wall was still up, and you see on this side of the wall, it's very plain and drab. I wonder which side of the wall that is. And on this side of the wall, it's very colorful. There's a lot of paintings, there's a lot of graffiti, a lot of freedom of expression. I wonder which side of the wall that is. So here's a map. This dark line, bold line, is the wall and how it's surrounded. Okay. All right. So it's your turn. Everybody answers the two questions in red, number 1 and number 2. And then you choose one of the questions in green. So when you send me your answers, however you send me your turn, you're sending me 3 answers. Incomplete sentences, please. So everyone answers. 1, was the Yalta Conference effective? Did it work? Tell me why or why not. 2, who won the Korean War and how do you know? All right, and then choose one of these next two. Number 3, how can we compare the Red Scare, so when America was afraid of communism and communists coming and invading our country, to America's reaction to 9/11? Or choose number 4, explain the difference between the plain side of the Berlin Wall and the graffiti side of the Berlin Wall, as in, why is one side plain and why is one side covered in paintings and graffiti? So I look forward to reading your answers, all of them, to number 1 and 2, and to your choices of either number 3 or 4. See you tomorrow.